My name is Julia Dawson. I'm 35 years old. 42 days ago, my younger brother stood up in the middle of our grandmother's funeral, pointed at me in front of more than 100 people, and said, "Grandma finally saw Julia for who she really is. She doesn't deserve to be part of this family anymore." The church became so quiet, I could hear the old ceiling fan turning above us. No one defended me, not my mother, not my father, not my uncle, not even the cousins who had grown up beside me. Instead, several people lowered their eyes. A few nodded, as if they had expected those words for years. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I simply stood, kissed my grandmother's coffin one last time, whispered goodbye, and walked out of the church. 42 days later, a courier knocked on my apartment door. Inside the certified envelope was a lawsuit. My own family accused me of stealing confidential family documents from my grandmother before she died. They demanded that I return every document, every letter, every notebook, and every personal item within 14 days. Otherwise, they promised to sue me for more than $200,000. They believed my grandmother had died before she could expose everything they had spent nearly 30 years hiding. They were wrong, because 6 months before she passed away, my grandmother had quietly begun preparing something far more dangerous than money. She documented every lie, every betrayal, every forged signature, every secret conversation, every person who stood by and watched. And the day those records were finally opened, inside a lawyer's conference room, my mother's perfect smile disappeared forever. If you've ever been treated like the problem simply because you refuse to stay silent, subscribe to the channel and write, "I'm still here," in the comments. You are not as alone as your family may have made you believe. Sometimes the truth doesn't arrive with anger. Sometimes it waits patiently inside a sealed envelope. And once that envelope is opened, there is no putting the truth back inside. I was 9 years old when I first realized my family talked about two different Julias. There was the Julia everyone outside our house believed they knew. The quiet girl. The excellent student. The polite child who always thanked adults. The girl teachers described as thoughtful. Then there was the Julia my mother described whenever relatives came over. The difficult daughter. The jealous sister. The selfish child. The dramatic girl who always wanted attention. For years, I believed both versions somehow existed. Because when you're a child, your parents become the mirror you use to understand yourself. If your own mother repeats often enough that you're selfish, eventually you stop asking whether she's wrong. You simply begin apologizing before you've done anything. My mother, Linda Dawson, possessed an extraordinary talent. She never humiliated me when we were alone. That would have been too obvious. Instead, she humiliated me one tiny sentence at a time, in front of everyone else. Family dinners, church picnics, birthday parties, neighborhood barbecues. She always smiled before speaking. "Julia has such a big heart," people smiled back. "She just doesn't always know how to share it." Everyone laughed. Or she'd say, "Julia means well. She's just incredibly emotional." More laughter. Then another sentence. "You know how exhausting teenage girls can be." Every comment sounded harmless by itself. Together, they became my identity. By the time I graduated from high school, relatives apologized to complete strangers before introducing me. "This is Julia." A short pause. "She's sensitive." Nobody asked me whether it was true. They had already heard the story. Only one person never believed it. My grandmother, Margaret Dawson. Everyone called her Maggie. She lived alone in a white farmhouse about an hour outside Columbus. There was a long gravel driveway lined with maple trees. In autumn, the leaves covered the road like a red and golden carpet. Her porch always smelled of fresh bread. She fed birds every morning at exactly 7. She never forgot anyone's birthday. And every Friday afternoon, she baked apple pies, whether anyone was coming over or not. Grandma never asked why I looked tired. She simply poured tea, cut another slice of pie, waited. Sometimes we sat together for an hour without saying more than a few words. Strangely, those quiet afternoons healed me more than anything anyone had ever said. When I was 11, she told me something I wouldn't understand for another 24 years. "People who lie the most," she said while kneading bread dough, always need the loudest audience. I asked her what she meant. She smiled. You'll understand one day. Then she changed the subject. I didn't think about those words again for years, not until everything fell apart. My father, Robert Dawson, wasn't cruel. Cruel people make choices. My father simply disappeared whenever my mother entered the room. He owned a small accounting firm. He coached Little League. Neighbors admired him. People at church described him as one of the kindest men they'd ever met. They weren't wrong. He was kind. Just never when kindness required courage. Whenever Mom criticized me, he adjusted his glasses. Whenever she accused me of ruining another holiday, he stared into his coffee. Whenever I searched his face, hoping he'd defend me, he found something fascinating on his dinner plate. Children notice silence. Eventually, they begin translating it. My father's silence always meant the same thing. You're on your own. The older I became, the smaller our family gatherings felt. Not because fewer people attended, because fewer people spoke to me. Mom had a way of telling stories that sounded completely believable. She never lied outright. She simply removed enough truth that the remaining pieces painted me as someone I wasn't. According to her, I forgot birthdays. I ignored phone calls. I never visited. I looked down on the family because I became a nurse. Every story contained just enough truth to survive questions. Nobody realized she'd quietly rewritten my life. Except Grandma. She noticed everything. She simply waited, and eventually she decided it was time to stop waiting. The phone call came on a rainy Thursday in October. I had just finished a 12-hour shift at Riverside Medical Center. My feet hurt. My coffee had gone cold hours earlier. I was halfway through unlocking my apartment door when my phone vibrated. Grandma. She almost never called after dinner. She knew I usually worked long shifts. I answered immediately. Hi, Grandma. For several seconds, she didn't speak. I could hear a clock ticking somewhere in the background. Then she quietly asked, Julia, are you alone? The question caught me off guard. I am. Good. Another pause. I need you to come see me this Saturday. Of course. Come early. I will. And don't tell your mother you're coming. My hand froze on the doorknob. I laughed softly. You know she'll find out eventually. I know. Grandma's voice became almost a whisper. I just don't want her to know before you get here. Something felt wrong. Very wrong. For the first time in my life, my grandmother sounded frightened. Not sick. Not tired. Frightened. What happened? I'll explain when you're here. Are you okay? I'm still standing. She forced a small laugh. But don't wait too long. Those were her last words before hanging up. I barely slept that night. The conversation replayed, over and over inside my head. Grandma had never hidden anything from me. She wasn't the kind of woman who enjoyed mysteries. If something was wrong, she simply said it. So why ask me to keep the visit secret? By Friday afternoon, I almost convinced myself I was imagining things. Maybe Mom and Grandma had argued again. That wasn't unusual. They had spent years disagreeing over almost everything. Politics, money, church, even the color Grandma painted her kitchen. Mom always insisted she was trying to help. Grandma always smiled politely and changed the subject. Saturday morning arrived gray and cold. The drive to Grandma's farmhouse usually relaxed me. That morning, it did the opposite. The maple trees lining the road had already begun losing their leaves. The gravel crunched beneath my tires as I pulled into the driveway. Everything looked normal. The bird feeders, the porch swing, the old blue pickup parked beside the barn. Even the smell of fresh bread drifted through the open kitchen window. But Grandma wasn't standing on the porch waiting for me. She always waited. Always. I found her inside. She was sitting at the kitchen table with 2 mugs already filled with tea. She smiled when she saw me. But something had changed. She looked thinner. Not dramatically. Just enough that I noticed. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached across the table. You came. I said I would. She squeezed my hand. I knew you would. For almost 10 minutes, we talked about ordinary things. Work, the weather, my patients. the tomatoes she'd managed to grow that summer. It felt strangely rehearsed, like both of us were avoiding the same conversation. Finally, she stood up. "Come with me." She led me upstairs, not toward her bedroom, toward the attic. I hadn't been up there since I was a teenager. The attic smelled exactly the way I remembered. Old cedar, dust, books, family photographs. Sunlight filtered through the tiny round window overlooking the fields. Grandma walked to an old oak cabinet standing against the far wall. She reached into her sweater pocket, pulled out a key, unlocked the cabinet. Inside was a small steel lockbox. She carried it carefully to an old wooden table. Then she looked directly at me. "Do you still have the little brass key I gave you after nursing school?" I blinked. "The tiny one?" "Yes. I've kept it." "Good." She smiled. "I hoped you would." "What does it open?" Instead of answering, she placed the steel box between us. There was a second lock on its front. Smaller, brass, exactly the same size as the key she'd given me 11 years earlier. My heart skipped. "You've had this all along?" She nodded. "I've been waiting until you were ready." I stared at the box, then back at her. "What is this?" She took a long breath before answering. "Insurance." "Against what?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked toward the attic window. Her expression became distant, almost sad. Finally, she whispered, "Against my own family." A chill ran through me. "My own family?" "Our family." I laughed nervously. "Grandma." "I'm serious." She reached across the table and gently placed her hand over mine. "I need you to listen without interrupting." I nodded. "The stories your mother has been telling about you." She paused. "I've heard every one of them." Heat rushed into my face. "I don't care anymore." "I do." Another silence. "Because none of them are true." I looked away. "I know." "No." She squeezed my hand tighter. "You've spent years believing that everyone agreed with her." She shook her head. "I never did." Tears burned behind my eyes. It wasn't what she said. It was how certain she sounded, as though she'd been carrying those words for years. I should have spoken sooner. Her voice cracked. "I thought keeping peace was protecting the family." She closed her eyes. I was wrong. The room became perfectly still. Outside, wind rattled the maple branches against the roof. Then Grandma said something that changed everything. "Julia, I've been writing things down." "What things?" "Everything." My stomach tightened. "What do you mean, everything?" She looked directly into my eyes. "Every lie. Every manipulation. Every time someone forged my name. Every conversation they thought I couldn't hear." I felt the air leave my lungs. "My name?" She nodded. "Yours too." I stared at her. "What are you talking about?" She slowly pushed the steel box toward me. "You'll understand. But not today." She rested her wrinkled hand on top of the box. "If anything happens to me, I want you to open it." I tried to laugh. "Grandma." She interrupted me. "No, promise me." Her voice wasn't emotional anymore. It was firm, the same voice she'd used when teaching me to ride a bicycle, the same voice she'd used when telling me never to settle for people who made me feel small. "Promise me." "I promise." She smiled. A tired smile. Then she said the sentence I would replay in my mind hundreds of times over the following months. "If they become angry after I'm gone, it means you opened the right box." I didn't understand what she meant. Not then, but before that autumn was over, my entire family would prove exactly how right she had been. 6 weeks after my grandmother's funeral, the certified letter finally arrived. I knew it wasn't good news the moment I saw the return address. Harrison and Cole, attorneys at law. My mother's handwriting wasn't on the envelope. She had found someone else to speak for her. Inside was a 12-page demand letter. According to their attorney, I had unlawfully removed personal journals, financial records, and family property from my grandmother's home during her final months. They demanded everything be returned within 14 days. If I refused, they would file a civil lawsuit. I finished reading the letter twice. Then I laughed. Not because it was funny, because every accusation described items I had never even touched. My grandmother had been right. If they become angry after I'm gone, it means you opened the right box. She knew this was coming. That same afternoon, I called the only person my grandmother had ever told me to trust if something happened. Her longtime attorney, Rebecca Morgan. She answered after 2 rings. "Julia?" I froze. "You knew I'd call?" "I've been expecting you." She sounded almost relieved. "When can you come?" "The first flight tomorrow. I'll be waiting." Rebecca's office occupied the 2nd floor of an old brick building downtown. Nothing about it looked impressive. Simple furniture, old bookshelves, family photographs, no luxury, no expensive decorations. Just decades of quiet work. She greeted me with a warm smile, then placed 3 thick folders on her desk. "I've been holding these for almost 8 months. I looked at the folders. "They're from Grandma?" Rebecca nodded. "Margaret knew there would be problems after she passed away." "How?" "Because she discovered them herself." My heart started pounding. Rebecca slowly opened the first folder. Inside were copies of canceled checks, property tax records, insurance documents, bank statements. Everything carefully organized. Then she opened the 2nd folder. Inside were handwritten notes, not accusations, not emotional letters, dates, times, conversations. Every page was written in my grandmother's neat handwriting. At the top of one page she had written, "If Julia is ever blamed, these are the facts." I couldn't speak. Rebecca quietly continued. "For nearly 3 years, your grandmother suspected someone had been moving money out of her personal accounts." I looked up. "My mother?" Rebecca didn't answer immediately. Instead, she handed me another document. It wasn't my mother's signature. It was my brother's. I stared at it. Again. And again. "No?" Rebecca nodded sadly. "He handled almost every transaction. But he wasn't alone." Over the next 2 hours, the entire picture came together. My brother had convinced my grandmother to let him help with online banking after she became less comfortable using computers. At first, everything was legitimate. Paying bills, ordering medication, managing utilities. Then small transfers began appearing. $500, $900, $1,200, always described as house maintenance or medical expenses. Grandma didn't notice immediately. She trusted him until one afternoon she visited the bank herself. The manager printed 6 months of statements. The numbers didn't make sense. Nearly $60,000 had disappeared. When she confronted my brother, he blamed bookkeeping mistakes. When she confronted my mother, Linda insisted Julia must have convinced Grandma to change her will. That was the moment Grandma stopped trusting anyone except Rebecca. Instead of accusing them, she quietly hired a forensic accountant. For 5 months, every transaction was documented, every signature verified, every withdrawal traced. By the time Grandma passed away, Rebecca possessed enough evidence to prove exactly where every dollar had gone. She simply hadn't shown anyone, because Grandma left one instruction. "Do not start a fight. Wait until they start one." "They sued the wrong person," Rebecca said quietly. "They forced us to open everything." 3 weeks later, our families met inside a mediation office. Not a courtroom. Not yet. A neutral conference room. Long wooden table. 8 chairs. Coffee that nobody touched. My mother arrived smiling. The same polite church smile she'd worn my entire life. My father avoided looking at me. My brother sat beside his attorney, convinced this meeting would end quickly. Their lawyer began confidently. "My clients simply want the return of family property." Rebecca smiled. "I believe your clients are mistaken." She slid one folder across the table. Then another. Then another. No speeches, no dramatic accusations. Just documents. For nearly 20 minutes, the room was silent except for paper turning. The opposing attorney's expression slowly changed. Confidence became confusion. Confusion became concern. Finally, he looked directly at my brother. You never told me about these bank transfers. Nobody answered. He continued reading. Then he looked at my mother. You told me Julia had access to these accounts. Rebecca quietly spoke for the first time. She never did. The attorney kept reading. Another minute passed. Then another. Finally, he removed his glasses, closed the final folder, and leaned back in his chair. I need to speak with my clients privately. They stepped into another room. The door closed. 15 minutes passed. Then 20. When they returned, everything had changed. The confidence was gone. My brother wouldn't look at me. My father looked 20 years older. My mother's smile had disappeared. For the first time in my entire life, I saw uncertainty in her eyes. Their attorney stood. My clients are withdrawing every allegation. Rebecca nodded. We expected that. He hesitated. Additionally, my clients are prepared to reimburse the estate in full. My brother closed his eyes. He finally whispered, I'm sorry. Not to me. To the floor. Rebecca slid one final paper across the table. A repayment agreement. No lawsuit, no public trial, no headlines. Only accountability. Exactly as Grandma wanted. 3 months later, the farmhouse was sold. Part of the recovered money established a scholarship for nursing students from low-income families. Rebecca asked what the fund should be called. I didn't hesitate. The Margaret Dawson Memorial Scholarship. Grandma had spent her life helping people quietly. It felt right that she would continue doing so. My father wrote me a letter. Not an email, not a text. A handwritten letter. It wasn't an excuse. It wasn't even an apology. It simply said, I should have spoken years ago. Silence is still a choice. It was the first honest thing he'd ever written to me. I kept it, not because it fixed the past, because it admitted the truth. My mother never contacted me again. Through relatives, I heard she left the church where she'd attended for almost 30 years. People asked questions she could no longer answer. Stories stopped matching facts. Eventually, she stopped telling them. Sometimes people ask whether I hate my family. I don't. Hate requires energy. I spent too many years surviving to waste what's left on hatred. Instead, I remember something my grandmother told me when I was 11. People who lie the most always need the loudest audience. She was right. Because lies survive only while everyone keeps applauding. Truth doesn't need applause. It only needs time. My name is Julia Dawson. I'm 35 years old. For most of my life, my family called me the difficult one. They thought repeating the story would make it true. Instead, they repeated it until they believed it themselves. In the end, no secret letter destroyed them. No revenge destroyed them. No courtroom destroyed them. The truth did. Quietly, patiently. One document. One bank statement. One signature. One honest conversation at a time. And once the truth finally had its turn to speak, nobody had anything left to say.